Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in one of the most singular and frankly confounding missing persons cases in modern history. The vanishing of 6-year-old Timothy Pitzen back in 2011.
It really is. And what makes it so unique is this bizarre paradox at its core.
Right. It didn't start like most of these cases do with a frantic 911 call about a snatched child.
No.
It began as an authorized parental extraction. A mother just walks into kindergarten and checks her son out of school.
Citing a family emergency. And that simple administrative act kicks off this 3-day multi-state road trip that profilers, almost immediately identified as a classic goodbye tour.
And that's the tragedy of it. The case starts inside the four corners of a domestic dispute, a mother just exercising her custodial rights.
But it spirals almost instantly into something deeply criminal, secretive, and just. So manipulative. And what has confounded investigators for, over a decade now, and what really defines this entire search is the final chilling contradiction left by his mother, Amy Fry Pitzen. The note. She took her own life, but she leaves this note saying her son is safe, and then immediately follows that assurance with this vindictive declaration, "You will never find him."
That deliberate ambiguity is the lock that we have to try and pick today.
It is.
So our mission in this deep dive is to reconstruct those final, meticulously calculated 3 days of Amy's journey. The roadmap of the tragedy, really. We're going to analyze the intense psychological pressures that drove her to this catastrophic decision.
But we're not just stopping at the psychology.
No, absolutely not. We're going to dissect the what you could almost call a chemical GPS that was provided by this incredible forensic soil evidence. We'll explain exactly why, over a decade later, law enforcement continues to focus their search on one specific, unique patch of treeless meadow in a tiny corridor of northwestern Illinois.
It's a case that is just suspended between behavioral analysis and hard forensic science. On one hand, you have a mother who engineered the perfect mystery to punish her husband.
And on the other, you have science trying to undo that perfect crime using pollen and dust.
Exactly. So let's unpack the motive first. We have to start with the fractured environment that Timothy was growing up in.
Timothy Pitzen was born in 2004. He was the only child of Jim and Amy, a vibrant first grader in Aurora, Illinois. By all counts, he loved Spider-Man, loved his Matchbox cars.
A totally normal, happy kid on the surface.
Completely. But that outward stability, it was completely misleading. Jim and Amy's marriage was rapidly disintegrating right underneath that veneer of normalcy.
The marriage was definitely on thin ice. But to really understand Amy's desperate actions, you have to look past the immediate conflict and examine her own history.
Okay.
Amy Fry Pitzen was 43 when she disappeared with Timothy. Jim was her fourth husband. And crucially, she had a long, documented history of severe depression.
And this wasn't just a feeling of sadness?
No. The sources indicate multiple prior episodes of suicidal ideation, even attempts. This was a deep and constant source of concern for her entire family, and of course, for Jim.
So this mental health history wasn't a private struggle anymore.
Yeah.
It was rapidly becoming the central, weaponizable factor in their marital breakdown.
That's it. The fear wasn't simply about losing the marriage.
It was about losing her son because of her mental history.
That is the critical motive. It's what profilers call custody phobia, and it truly defined her actions. The specter of divorce, it first came up back in 2008.
3 years before.
Right. Jim discovered Amy had been maintaining secret contact with an ex-husband. She was even planning to meet him secretly, and Jim gave her an ultimatum. You cease all contact, or we're getting a divorce, and I will seek full custody.
And that moment established the baseline terror for Amy.
It did. She realized that any divorce proceeding would put her entire past under a microscope. Her depression, her attempts, all of it would be laid bare, and used to argue she was an unfit parent.
In her mind, that was a losing battle.
Precisely. And in the mind of someone suffering from severe, distortionary mental illness, the fear isn't just a reasonable concern, it becomes catastrophic thinking.
She didn't just fear losing time with him.
She feared total, permanent loss. The sources describe Timothy not just as her child, but as an extension of her own identity.
That's a really profound psychological observation. So if a child is an extension of the parent's identity, what happens when that parent faces the prospect of losing them entirely?
It leads to what is, in the perpetrator's mind, an act of self-preservation, not just child removal. If she loses him, she is psychologically speaking, erased.
Wow.
We see this often in high-conflict custody cases, especially where a parent suffers from, say, narcissistic tendencies or deep object loss issues. If she couldn't possess him or maintain that identity connection, then no one could, especially not Jim, who she felt was orchestrating her erasure.
So that kind of mindset is what drives these meticulously planned abductions. She genuinely believes she's saving the child from a perceived threat.
In this case, the threat was Jim's custody.
And this fear was, horrifically reinforced in the immediate lead-up to the disappearance, what the investigators call the precipitating crisis.
Yes, the breaking point. It arrived in the weeks right before May 11th, 2011. There was an argument over a planned Bahamas vacation that Jim wanted to take.
Okay.
And immediately after that dispute, Amy took a significant dose of sleeping pills, which resulted in her falling down a steep embankment near their home. She had to be hospitalized.
So, in Amy's catastrophic narrative, this hospitalization was it. It was the final, ironclad piece of evidence Jim needed to use against her in court. The documentation was now definitive.
It cemented her deepest fear. Her sister, Cara Jacobs, confirmed Amy was terrified that Jim would use the hospitalization to declare her permanently unfit.
So that was the trigger.
That was the trigger. For Amy, she had to act immediately before any custody papers were filed. She had to prevent the loss she equated with her own psychological death.
And what's so crucial here is that this plan wasn't just hatched in a hospital waiting room. Investigators found clear evidence of premeditation that goes back months.
This is where you see the cold, calculated planning start to emerge. Amy's movements months before, they strongly suggest she was preparing for this exit.
How so?
Police records revealed that in February, and then again in March of 2011, Amy made two highly unusual, completely unexplained road trips.
Where to?
To the Sterling and Rock Falls area of Illinois.
Which is hundreds of miles away from their home in Aurora, deep into northwestern Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And she had no connections there. No family, no friends.
That's the point. None.
Well,
To investigators, these aren't just random weekend drives. Retrospectively, they're viewed as scouting missions.
she was locating something.
Something essential to her plan. She was either making final arrangements for a clandestine meeting with an adoptive party, the handoff site, or, much more ominously, she was selecting a remote, suitable site for concealment after a tragic act.
So the plan to remove Timothy, or eliminate him and herself, had been gestating long before that hospitalization.
It just needed a trigger.
Let's move now into the minute-by-minute account of this three-day odyssey. What profilers so tragically term the goodbye tour. This wasn't a journey designed for escape.
No, it was for creating a perfect final set of memories for the child. It was all about masking the desperation of the adult's plan.
So Wednesday morning, May 11th.
Jim Pitzen drops Timothy off at Greenman Elementary in Aurora at 8 a.m. Green shorts, brown t-shirt, his little Spider-Man backpack. Just a normal, routine exchange. A kiss goodbye. Love you, Dad.
The normalcy is just the cruelest part of this whole narrative.
It is.
And then, 15 minutes later, that routine ends. 8:15 a.m., Amy arrives.
She tells the school personnel there's been a family emergency, and she checks Timothy out of his kindergarten class.
And the school, they just let her.
Well, they followed standard custodial procedure. That's the immediate investigative hurdle. Since Amy had custodial rights, it wasn't legally a kidnapping. She signed the proper paperwork.
So she basically leveraged established protocol to turn a family disagreement into a catastrophic missing persons case.
And she moves with chilling efficiency. At 10 a.m., she takes her 2004 Ford Expedition to a local repair shop for service.
So she was making sure the vehicle was mechanically sound for a long trip, more confirmation of the planning.
Absolutely. An employee from the shop actually drove them while the SUV was being serviced. And where do they go?
The zoo.
The Brookfield Zoo. They spent over 4 hours there, from 10:30 in the morning till 3:00 p.m. Surveillance footage confirms they appeared relaxed, happy. Timothy seemed completely unaware of the gravity of the situation. He just thought it was a spontaneous adventure with his mom.
And that focus on creating an ideal distraction-filled environment, what you call the peak experience, that's key to the goodbye tour profile, isn't it? It's about creating this sense of final perfection.
And that leads directly to her choice for the evening. They check into the Key Lime Cove Resort Indoor Water Park in Gurnee, Illinois.
Another huge, high-excitement venue.
Right. It screams fun memory. It's designed to maximize the positive sensory input for a 6-year-old.
And while they're enjoying the water slides in Gurnee, Jim Pitzen goes to pick up his son from school.
Finds out what Amy did, and the alarm bells are now deafening. He calls the police.
And this is where the early investigation really struggled.
It did. Because Amy had those custodial rights, law enforcement initially treated this as a domestic dispute, not an abduction. It wasn't until the following day, when Amy failed to return or establish any reliable contact, that the level of concern escalated.
And that delay? It severely hampered the activation of an Amber Alert and the wider distribution of information. They lost critical time.
They do.
The next morning, the journey continues north out of Illinois.
And across state lines into Wisconsin, they head for the Dells.
The water park capital of the world.
Right. Financial records place them checking into the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, another massive water park. And the attempt to maintain the facade of a normal vacation continues all day. Amy uses the time to buy more things for Timothy.
What specifically did she buy?
She bought new children's clothing, a toy car, a Hot Wheels vehicle, and a craft kit. These are small, normalizing domestic details.
They're designed to sell the narrative to Timothy.
Exactly. This is just a fun road trip. We're stocking up on fun stuff.
But the real importance of this day, May 12th, isn't the shopping, it's the confirmed life.
That's right. Surveillance footage from the Kalahari Resort confirms Timothy was alive and well throughout May 12th. He is seen with his mother, exhibiting typical childhood behavior. It confirms the tight bond and, the deliberate creation of this joyous facade.
Then we get to May 13th, Friday the 13th. This is the pivot point. This is the day the fun ends and the deliberate concealment begins.
At 10 a.m., we get the last confirmed visual sighting of Timmothy Pitzen.
What is?
Amy and Timothy are checking out of the Kalahari Resort. Security camera footage shows Timothy holding his mother's hand. He's carrying that distinctive Spider-Man backpack, the same one Jim dropped him off with on Wednesday.
And how does he seem?
He appears slightly fidgety, maybe a little tired. A perfectly normal, mundane, final visual image. This is the last recorded sighting of Timothy by any independent source.
The expedition then starts driving south, back toward Illinois, and then we get the final, definitive, auditory proof of life.
Between noon and 1:30 p.m., Amy calls her mother and her brother-in-law. She assures them, using these vague terms, that they're safe and fine, that the fun is continuing.
But she pointedly ignores Jim's calls.
She does. And the crucial detail is that multiple family members heard Timothy in the background during these calls. His last recorded words, according to the family, were that he was hungry.
And we know exactly where those calls were made from, thanks to the cell tower data.
We do. The cell data triangulates her location to a rural sector northwest of Sterling, Illinois, near Route 40. This places her deep into Lee and Whiteside counties, the exact same region she had previously scouted in February and March.
And this location brings us to the critical 6-hour blackout window. At 1:30 p.m., Amy's phone powers down.
And it is never used again. For the next 6 hours, until 7:25 p.m., she vanishes from all digital and physical tracking methods.
That 6-hour window is the epicenter of the entire mystery.
It is. She drove through this vast network of rural, sparsely populated roads in Lee and Whiteside counties. The mileage added to the SUV during this period suggests extensive, meandering travel. This wasn't a quick drop-off.
So investigators believe that this 6-hour window is precisely when the core event of the disappearance occurred.
Yes. Whether that was the complicated logistical handoff to a prearranged adoptive party, or the final desperate act of homicide and concealment.
What's so significant about this specific area of Illinois? Why there?
Well, this region is characterized by flat, open farmland, but it's interspersed with small state parks, forest preserves, and river systems. The Rock River runs right through it.
So it offers endless opportunities for concealment.
Endless. A vehicle can quickly pull off a secondary road and enter a secluded area without being easily observed. It's the perfect landscape for what she was planning.
She finally reemerges at 7:25 p.m., alone.
Alone. In Winnebago, Illinois, at a Family Dollar store, the car has been cleaned. She buys a pen, notepaper, and envelopes.
The specific tools she needs to write her suicide note.
Yes. And witnesses describe her demeanor as calm, which is a chilling psychological indicator. It suggests she had completed the ultimate task in her plan, whatever it was. She was at peace with it.
She then continues toward Rockford, checking into room 108 at the Rockford Inn at 11:15 p.m.
Still alone.
Still alone, and the next day, May 14th, the discovery.
Housekeeping finds the scene at 12:30 p.m. Amy Pitzen had committed suicide. The scene itself was described as tidy, meticulously organized.
Which is consistent with someone who planned every element of their final act.
It is. But the most important evidence wasn't what they found in that room, it was what was absent.
The missing inventory.
The missing inventory is critical. There was absolutely no sign of Timothy. His Spider-Man backpack was gone, the new children's clothing, the Hot Wheels, the craft kit, all gone.
And Amy's own clothes were missing too, right?
The clothes she was seen wearing when she left the Kalahari resort were also gone. She had clearly changed into a different outfit before checking into the Rockford Inn. This suggests she meticulously discarded or concealed anything that tied the recent past to the present.
So the clothes she wore during that 6-hour blackout window were likely soiled or marked in some way.
And she ensured they would never be found.
This brings us to the central text of the mystery, the suicide note itself. It's more than just a farewell. It's a deliberate, tactical document.
Oh, absolutely. It's designed to control the narrative of the disappearance from beyond the grave and, crucially, to inflict the maximum emotional pain on Jim Pitzen by denying him any possibility of closure.
It's a calculated act of psychological revenge.
It is. The note is short, powerful, and contains that profound contradiction. She writes that Timothy is safe and with people who will love and care for him.
That's the assurance.
But then, the final malicious twist, you will never find him.
And that contradiction safety versus permanent disappearance is what has allowed two separate, competing theories to drive this investigation for over a decade.
Let's start with Theory A. This is the illegal adoption, or the handoff theory. This is the thread of hope that Jim Pitzen and parts of the extended family still cling to.
And it requires taking Amy's note literally.
You have to. The premise is that Amy used some secretive, maybe underground network to place Timothy with a prearranged family unit, thereby protecting him from Jim and the custody battle she feared so much.
What are the strongest pieces of evidence that support this interpretation?
First and foremost, the exact phrasing, with people who will love and care for him. The use of the plural, people, suggests a family or a group of caregivers.
Not just one person.
Right. It lends weight to a planned guardianship arrangement, not just a spontaneous drop-off with a friend. Second, you have to remember the premeditation. Those 2 unexplained scouting trips to Sterling and Rock Falls in February and March.
She wasn't necessarily scoping out a shallow grave. She could have been meeting the adoptive party.
Exactly. She could have been meeting them, finalizing logistics, verifying the location where the handoff would occur.
And the forensic evidence from the hotel room doesn't rule this out.
It doesn't. The knife used in her suicide contained only Amy's blood. And while she was meticulous in cleaning, the lack of any significant trace of Timothy's blood strongly suggests he was not killed in that room. The possibility remains that she dropped him off alive, then carried out her final plan hours later.
But here's the logical flaw for me. If she went through all this trouble to engineer this elaborate, perfect handover, why kill herself immediately after? Wouldn't a parent who is truly dedicated to the child's long-term safety want to survive and make sure the arrangement holds?
That is the critical logical problem with the adoption theory. If the goal was simply the child's safety, suicide is completely counterintuitive.
So how do you explain it?
The psychological interpretation argues that her overwhelming catastrophic thinking meant that survival was never an option for her. For Amy, saving Timothy meant protecting him from Jim's custody, and she believed the only way to ensure that permanent protection and deliver the ultimate punishment to Jim was by removing herself from the equation entirely.
Ensuring the secret of the handover went to the grave with her.
So the promise you will never find him becomes logistical. She created a perfect hiding place that Jim could never penetrate.
Okay, now let's pivot to theory B, which is, let's be honest, it's the prevailing criminological and statistical view.
Altruistic filicide.
Explain that.
This theory suggests Amy killed Timothy to save him from what she perceived as a horrific future under his father's custody.
And this theory uses all the same pieces of evidence, but just interprets them through a much darker lens. Let's start with the goodbye tour.
The tour itself becomes damning evidence under this theory. It's a textbook precursor to planned familial homicide. The parent creates one final, positive, perfect memory.
To contrast with the violent act.
Yes. It's an attempt to minimize the child's suffering in their final moments and, in a twisted way, maximize the perceived nobility of the parent's action.
Then you have the behavior during that 6-hour blackout window. It strongly suggests the concealment of a crime scene, not just a separation.
This is critical. You have to consider the removal of the iPass transponder from the windshield.
The electronic toll device.
Right. If she just dropped him off at a friend's house or met a couple in a parking lot, she would just drive away. There's no need to actively disable electronic tracking and add all this undocumented mileage on rural back roads.
Unless you're hiding something significant.
Exactly. The removal of the iPass shows a conscious act of operational security. It's intended to prevent any retrospective tracking to a crime scene or, more likely, a body disposal site.
And under this theory, the note's language is reinterpreted entirely.
Completely. From a forensic psychology standpoint, the word safe is tragically common in parental murder-suicides. It often means safe in heaven or safe from the world. It reflects the parent's distorted view that the child is better off dead than in the custody of the surviving parent.
So the note's finality, "You will never find him," becomes the ultimate vindictive punishment, a permanent denial of closure for Jim.
The ultimate act of control from beyond the grave.
And what does the overwhelming statistical probability suggest in cases like this?
The statistics are just sobering. In the vast majority of cases globally where a parent abducts a child, travels to a remote location, and then commits suicide, the child is found to be deceased.
So the combination of Amy's mental health crisis, her custody phobia, the goodbye tour, the meticulous concealment, it all points law enforcement in one direction.
It all points toward filicide, even as they must, ethically and legally, maintain the endangered missing classification.
With the psychological evidence suspended in this terrible ambiguity, the investigation was forced to rely on pure science. Since no human witnessed what happened in that blackout window, investigators had to listen to the silent witnesses. The soil and the pollen stuck to the car.
And this is where the work of Microtrace, a forensic analysis company, became the most scientifically sophisticated lead in the entire case.
What do they do?
Microtrace performed this deep, specialized analysis on the road debris, the mud, the soil that was compacted in the wheel wells, the bumpers, the undercarriage of that Ford Expedition. They weren't just looking at surface dirt.
They were looking for material that got pushed deep into the vehicle's crevices.
Right. Stuff that would only get there if the vehicle was driven off-road and onto soft ground. This analysis became the chemical GPS of Amy's final 6 hours.
Before we get to the foil, let's quickly clarify the one piece of ambiguous biological evidence they found inside the SUV.
Right. The blood evidence. Timothy's DNA was confirmed in blood found in the back seat.
But the family had an explanation for that.
They did. They immediately offered a plausible, though completely unverifiable, explanation that Timothy had suffered a severe nosebleed in the car about a week before the trip.
And forensic investigators couldn't definitively date the blood.
Precisely. They couldn't rule out the nosebleed scenario. But, crucially, they also couldn't rule out that some of the blood was fresh, potentially related to an injury sustained during that critical blackout window.
So it's highly suggestive, but it's not definitive proof of homicide.
Which keeps the case technically open.
Okay, let's focus on the hard science, the microtrace analysis that truly narrowed the search area in Lee and Whiteside counties. They used two primary methods, right? Palynology and mineralogy.
Exactly. Forensic palynology is the study of pollen and spores. Pollen is incredibly resilient, and it's unique to specific regions, even specific patches of ground. Mineralogy examines the actual composition of the soil and road material, the grit, the stones, the minerals.
And by synthesizing these two data sets, they could basically reconstruct the exact environmental profile of where that SUV traveled off the paved road.
That's the goal.
And the findings.
Yay.
They painted a highly specific picture of a very non-average location. Let's start with the mineralogy, specifically the discovery of anhydrite.
Anhydrite is fascinating.
Exciting.
It's an anhydrous calcium sulfate. Basically, it's gypsum without the water content. And it is a rare mineral. It's definitely not naturally ubiquitous across the general Midwestern terrain.
So its presence is a huge flag.
A huge flag. It strongly suggests the vehicle came into contact with a very specific site, likely related to construction materials. Drywall, for instance, contains gypsum. So in rural Illinois, this could suggest contact near a recent construction site, an abandoned mine, or maybe a place where construction debris was illegally dumped in a remote area.
So it's a highly localized marker that drastically restricts the search area.
Drastically.
Okay, so she pulled off a specific kind of road into a specific kind of ground. Let's look at the road surface findings. Glass beads.
Right. The vehicle's undercarriage contained these tiny reflective glass beads, the same material used to create reflective striping on secondary asphalt roads.
So that rules out driving exclusively on dirt roads or deep in the woods.
It does. It indicates that Amy stopped and perhaps executed a harsh maneuver like a turn or a rapid backing up onto a gravel turnout or shoulder that was immediately adjacent to an asphalt road that had been recently striped.
So it places the final off-road maneuver near a transition point.
Exactly, where the public road ends and the concealed site begins.
Now we turn to the botany, the life found on the car. They found weeds, Queen Anne's lace, and black mustard.
And these specific weeds were found directly impacting the undercarriage. They're common, yes, but they thrive in very specific conditions. Disturbed soil, often along field borders, drainage ditches, and roadsides where the land is fallow or neglected.
So that confirms the vehicle was driven off the hard surface and into soft, unmaintained, brushy ground.
It does, and this specific vegetation informs the terrain profile. And this is where what they didn't find is almost more important.
What was that?
The overall pollen profile indicated a treeless meadow.
A treeless meadow.
Yes. And this is a definitive negative finding because the analysis showed a significant absence of deep woods pollen, like oak or birch, in the immediate impact zone. If Amy had concealed the child deep within a managed forest preserve, the debris would have been saturated with forest pollen. This suggests an open, sunny, grassy field or meadow, a location exposed to the elements.
And maybe the single most exclusionary piece of evidence, considering they're searching in northwestern Illinois.
The absence of corn or soybean pollen?
Which is everywhere out there.
That finding eliminates nearly 99% of the surrounding terrain. Northwestern Illinois is dominated by industrial row crop agriculture. If she had simply driven into a random field, the vehicle would have been covered in the pollen or residue of corn or soybeans.
So the lack of those agricultural markers steers investigators away from typical farmland.
And toward nature preserves, fallow fields, utility easements, or specific governmental properties that are distinctly non-agricultural.
And finally, the hydrology data suggested water was nearby.
The soil moisture and the type of vegetation present suggested that a body of water, a small pond, a creek, or a drainage stream, was located within a few hundred feet of where the car stopped, which is significant for disposal and concealment.
So if we synthesize all of that, anhydrate, glass beads, disturbed ground, treeless meadow, non-agricultural land, near water, this is how Microtrace narrowed down hundreds of square miles of rural Illinois to a highly specific environmental corridor.
Right there in Lee and Whiteside counties, north of Sterling and Rock Falls, it's the closest thing the investigation has to a witness. It's an environmental fingerprint left on the car.
The horrific reality, though, is that while the science provided the type of location, finding that precise, unique patch of forgotten ground.
In a region that undergoes seasonal changes and land use variations, it has proven nearly impossible.
Let's briefly circle back to the intentional acts of omission. The vanishing inventory, the Spider-Man badges, the new clothes, the Hot Wheels, Amy's original clothes. All these items were actively removed from the vehicle and the hotel room.
And that action just reinforces the filicide theory. I mean, if she had successfully handed him off, why would she need to dispose of his identifying possessions? Especially the clothes she was wearing, unless those clothes were stained or held fibers or soil that could tie her back to the disposal site.
And we have to reiterate the significance of the iPass.
The iPass removal was a conscious, final act of anti-forensics. By removing that electronic device, she ensured there would be zero digital breadcrumbs documenting her passage on the tollway system. This speaks volumes about her intent to conceal the route to that final site.
She wasn't just abandoning a child, she was hiding a location.
This level of meticulous concealment, it strongly supports the theory that she was hiding a body, not just driving away from a simple public handover.
The tension between the scientific probability of homicide and the emotional pull of the adoption theory has kept this case in the public eye for years.
It has.
And that enduring hope was violently and ruthlessly exploited in 2019, 8 years after the disappearance. This incident delivered what was perhaps the most devastating trauma of the entire investigation for the family.
It was an incredible moment of psychological upheaval. On April 3, 2019, a young man was found disoriented in Newport, Kentucky, claiming to be the long-missing Timmothy Pitzen.
For 24 hours, everyone, the family, the media, the investigators, they all experienced this profound sense of shock and euphoria. The possibility that the adoption theory had finally come true was it was electrifying.
And he had an incredibly specific, elaborate story designed to match the missing child profile. He claimed he was 14 years old, the correct age progression at that time. He said he'd escaped two kidnappers, describing them specifically as men with bodybuilder physiques.
A very cinematic detail.
Very. He alleged they had held him captive for 7 years, moving him continuously between various Red Roof Inn locations across the Midwest before he finally managed to break free in the Cincinnati area.
And the resources deployed were immediate.
Oh, absolutely. The FBI and Aurora police detectives rushed down to Cincinnati. They were operating under the assumption that they were dealing with a miracle, but almost immediately the red flags started to pop up.
What were the first signs that something was wrong?
Well, the claimant refused fingerprinting, which is highly unusual for someone seeking to verify their identity and safety. More critically, when they pressed him for details about his life in Aurora, his father's name, his home address, his school, he couldn't recall basic, verifiable childhood information.
So his story was elaborate in its kidnapping details, but paper-thin on personal context.
Exactly. And the expedited DNA test delivered the final, crushing blow.
It wasn't him.
It was not Timmothy Pitzen. He was Brian Michael Reaney, a 23-year-old ex-convict from Ohio with a history of fabricating traumatic stories, including claiming he was a sex trafficking victim to gain sympathy and resources.
And his motive was entirely self-serving. He was just capitalizing on a deep family tragedy.
He admitted it to the FBI. He had recently seen a segment on the Pitzen case on the show 2020. He was trying to escape his own troubled life, his recent prison release, his criminal record. He hoped that adopting the persona of a famous missing child would grant him protection and a clean slate.
It was an act of extreme malice.
It was. Reaney was subsequently sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for aggravated identity theft. And the sentencing judge explicitly highlighted the unnecessary pain he inflicted upon Jim Pitzen and the family, noting that Reaney had exploited the most sacred emotion, a parent's hope, for his own personal gain.
And that hoax really served as a tragic reminder that the lack of a body allows the adoption theory to persist, which makes the family so vulnerable to this kind of malicious deception.
It does.
So as of today, where does the investigation stand?
As of the most recent updates, the investigation into Timmothy Pitzen remains active. The case is still categorized as endangered missing, which reflects the legal and ethical necessity to maintain hope in the absence of a body. The Aurora Police Department and the FBI, they remain committed largely because of the concrete, actionable leads from the forensic science.
And the passage of time means investigators have to rely heavily on age-progressed images.
That's the critical work of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. They continuously update these age-progressed images, the most recent one being from 2024, depicting Timothy as a 19-year-old young man.
And what did the artists focus on?
They focus on features that are genetically immutable, the precise shape and set of the ears, the orbital bone structure, the spacing of the eyes. These images are essential for aiding public identification should he be alive and unaware of his true identity.
Yet, James Pitzen, his father, he maintains his hope, and it's based squarely on the premise of that note, that Amy loved him too much to ever harm him.
His hope is rooted in that paternal connection, and it is entirely understandable. In letters he's released on the anniversaries, he writes of looking forward to spending time with his son again. He is sustaining the belief that Amy's underlying love meant the note was truthful about his safety.
It's that deep, persistent hope that keeps the search for a living Timothy alive.
It is, but scientifically, the investigation continually circles back to the microtrace soil data.
It's their most powerful tool.
It is, that unique environmental signature. The blend of anhydrate, the glass road beads, the Queen Anne's lace, the treeless meadow profile, the abscess of agricultural pollen. That is the ghost of the crime scene. It has to exist somewhere in that corridor in Lee and Whiteside County. It's the final, tangible piece of the puzzle.
And the only way to definitively determine if Amy's final act was a handoff or a tragic concealment.
So the ongoing request from law enforcement is focused less on tracking people and more on tracking topography. The plea is continuously directed toward local Illinois residents, landowners, utility workers, hunters, hikers in northwestern Illinois.
They're asking them to look for anything that might have survived the elements near a road shoulder that pulls off into a specific type of grassy, fallow land near a stream or pond.
They're looking for the remnants of that missing inventory. The Spider-Man backpack, a pile of clothes, or the Hot Wheels car. The area is massive, but the environmental fingerprint is just so specific.
So we conclude with the synthesis. The case is suspended between the strong forensic suggestion of a murder-suicide and concealment in a remote meadow, versus the enduring emotional hope driven by the mother's final, contradictory, and deeply manipulative note.
The lack of a body is what sustains the paradox. Amy Pitzen ensured that her final act would deny closure to the man she intended to punish. The physical evidence points one way to a secretive, tragic disposal site in rural Illinois. But the mother's note provides just enough ambiguity to allow the idea of a clandestine life to persist, making this one of the most painfully protracted missing persons cases in American history.
The Vanishing of Timothy Pitzen is a haunting study of how intentional malicious ambiguity can be weaponized to indefinitely suspend a criminal investigation.
The case rests permanently between the high probability indicated by science and the persistent hope embedded in a mother's final words.
The note promised, "You will never find him." We've spent this deep dive detailing how forensic science mapped the area down to the type of weeds, the mineral content of the soil, the lack of agricultural growth. Given the astonishing precision of the microtrace analysis, is it possible that the key to unlocking this whole secret lies not in tracking a person, but simply in matching a specific soil sample to a unique, forgotten patch of ground that Amy Pitzen thought she'd chosen perfectly?
It raises a profound question about investigative limits. What do you do when human manipulation is so expertly introduced that it deliberately invalidates statistical probability? Amy Pitzen engineered the perfect puzzle, weaponizing secrecy and hope against the father she despised. And until that specific treeless meteorite is found, her final, chilling promise remains tragically unbroken.
Something to mull over as you think about how far science can really take us against the human desire for ultimate secrecy. Thank you for diving deep with us today.